In Mexico, there have been more UFO sightings in the last 5 years than anywhere else in the world. In 1994, the hills of Guadalajara were the setting for a close encounter of the second kind. That is to say, the UFO was not only seen at close hand, but there was some interaction between it and the man who photographed it. Raul Dominguez is a landowner and a businessman. He recalls the extraordinary craft he saw that day.
It was a machine that I believe was about 25 meters in diameter. The lower half revolved. I didn't notice any noise until it was very close to me. I heard it when it was 10 or 12 meters above my head, and I heard a sound like bees buzzing. I felt my hair bristling, and my clothes moved as well as my hair. Immediately afterwards, these marks appeared on my face and hands. I was ill with stomach pains and bad indigestion for a long time. The whole thing affected me very much, both physically and psychologically. It has changed me. I'm certain now that UFOs exist.
Pictures of what may or may not be spacecraft from another world are only as real as the integrity of the witnesses who take them. And an extraterrestrial interpretation assumes the possibility that we could be visited by aliens in the first place. The main argument against this are the vast distances involved in space. The nerve center for those scientists who believe that far out in the cosmos is the only place we'll find ET is here at Arecibo in Puerto Rico. The largest radio telescope in the world is at the disposal of SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence.
I really do think that the aliens are out there. I don't think they're here. The reason for that is simply the lack of credible evidence, in my opinion. I mean, it's very hard to travel from one star to the next, despite what you see in the movies and on television. It's not just a matter of calling up the engine room and telling Scotty to put the pedal to the metal.
SETI was originally funded by NASA, and they've searched for signs of extraterrestrial intelligence for more than 20 years. The space agency no longer invests in their experiment, and there are those who argue it's because NASA already knows that ET is here.
Observing 4067?
No, 4061.
4061. It didn't choose out.
It's a view that SETI's astronomers reject out of hand. They're convinced that the first contact with ET will be a radio signal that shows up on this screen.
Yeah, people often ask, have you had any close calls? Are you close to success? Well, that isn't the way this works. It's kind of what you might call a one-bit experiment. In other words, it's either yes or no. And so far, the answer is no. It's sort of like Chris Columbus, you know, until he sights land, all he's seen is water, and that's our situation.
ET's in there.
So far, all signals received have turned out to be false alarms. So is it worth continuing the search?
The question of whether anybody else is out there is the oldest unanswered question that our species has ever asked. And personally, I wouldn't work on a project that I didn't think had a chance of success.
Well, I certainly believe that the aliens are out there. I mean, I have personally no doubt about that. Obviously, there's no proof. In my opinion, there's no proof of that yet. But the reason that I think that it's got to be true is primarily just the vastness of the cosmos. I mean, there are 500 billion stars in our galaxy. There are 50 billion other galaxies, each with a 500 billion stars. That's a lot of real estate. And it would be bizarre in the extreme to think that this is the only bit of real estate where anything interesting is happening.
The founding father of SETI, Professor Frank Drake, devised an equation that estimates the universe to be teeming with intelligent life. So if ET is out there and could have reached us, then surely those who deal with space travel are most likely to have seen some signs. Dr. Farouk El-Baz, a geologist, now works at Boston University. For 6 years, he was a senior member of NASA's legendary Apollo program. He was head of astronaut training and responsible for the intricate experiments that were scheduled for testing on the moon's surface. During his time in mission control, he experienced at first hand some unusual happenings involving astronaut Ken Mattingly in the lunar orbiter.
The one most peculiar sighting of something that we never found out what it was, and we thought it should be easy to, was the sighting of flashes on the surface of the moon by Ken Mattingly during the Apollo 16 mission. One of the objectives of that Apollo 16 mission was to see how much can we see and photograph in the part of the moon that is not lit by the sun, but by earth shine. The first time Ken Mattingly began to do this, he said something like, "I'll be damned, I just saw a flash." And we said, "What flash?" So he said, "I just saw a light flash on the surface of the moon. Something on the moon flashed." As he came around the next time and we said, "Now be careful with this thing and look again and mark your time when you see it so we know exactly when it happens, because we want to tie this to whatever is happening in the landing site."
One of NASA's experiments on the moon involved highly sensitive seismometers that, among other things, could detect the impact of incoming meteors. If Mattingly's flashes appeared again, the instruments would surely record the impact of a meteor, the most likely explanation for his sighting. And so, on the next lunar orbit, Ken Mattingly was briefed to look out for flashes and report what he saw.
He said, "Okay." And he did that, and he saw 2 flashes this time, and that one orbit, not one. So we picked up the exact times, and we took these to our colleagues, the ones that had the seismometers. But at that time, there was absolutely no evidence of anything hitting the moon at these hours, because it would have been picked up. For it, there is absolutely no explanation. And that remained a complete mystery.
Of course, at this time, the Russians had an unmanned presence on the moon. Nevertheless, there are unexplained pictures. This one shows a shadow racing across the moon's surface. And here a flash appears from a crater as an unidentified object passes overhead.
There's a funny object right there. And the astronaut's going to pan around here. Notice the moon never goes out of sight. There it is again, and the object, it's changed.
Dr. Jack Kasher has studied this film and is convinced that it shows a UFO on the moon. Head of physics at Nebraska University, Dr. Kasher's academic background is impressive.
I studied the physics of the effects of nuclear weapons, among other things. I specialized in electromagnetic theory, electromagnetic pulses, did some work on the Star Wars program out there. In 1991, I started doing research with NASA. My clearance was up to the secret restricted data. In fact, one paper that I wrote was so classified that I couldn't read it myself, but I had to get special permission to read it.
2 main engines up and burning. 3, 2, 1, 0, and liftoff of the Space Shuttle Discovery and the Upper Atmosphere Research Satellite, opening a new era of studying the Earth's environment from space.
Dr. Kasher has studied closely another film taken in space during shuttle mission STS-48. He's certain that here there is irrefutable proof that there are UFOs in space, and NASA must know it. After a flash, an object seems to move rapidly away from an approaching missile. NASA sees it differently.
4 NASA scientists looked at these objects.